Hello GQ, I'm Noah Wyle, and these are the biggest moments from the Pitt, Season 1. COVID flashback.
Robby, we need to intubate here.
Dr. Adamson just went down with a pulse ox of 65.
This show really was born in the pandemic in 2020 when I was sitting at home receiving a lot of mail from first responders and people that are in the front lines who had felt that ER was somehow inspirational to them going into that line of work. So they were touching base with Dr. Carter and saying thank you, or just telling me how hard it was out there and what they were going through. And I was really moved by all that mail, and I didn't really know how to participate or be of service at that moment. So I just pivoted it all to John Wells, and I called him up and I said, hey, I'm getting a lot of interesting letters that are telling me there's another story to tell in the healthcare sphere. And I know you don't want to do the old show, and I don't want to do the old show. But if you ever wanted to talk about what's happening right now and scream something from a mountaintop, I'd volunteer to scream it. That started the whole conversation of what this show eventually became, which is ostensibly a love letter to first responders. We wanted to analyze what aggregate toll working in those jobs has been like for those practitioners over the last 5 years, and have that embodied by a single character who had to work through that period of time and hasn't had time to unpack any of it yet, but has compartmentalized those traumas the way we all have in order to get on with their daily lives and show up for our coworkers or our families. But this is the day that the demons come to call. This is the day that that's no longer sustainable. And over the course of this shift, for various reasons, he's triggered into those traumatic flashbacks that took place 5 years ago during COVID, when he had to take his mentor off life support in order to save another patient, and ultimately everybody died. That undealt with memory, that repressed guilt, is what's coming up in these flashbacks when Robby gets triggered. When he comes into work, he's fairly unaware of how close to being a drowning man he is. The water is at his ankles when he walks to work, and it progressively rises over the course of the shift until by the end, when he's back in that peds room showing Leah's dead body to Jake and recounting all the people that he's lost that day, the waters are over his head and he's drowning. This is the job that keeps on giving. Nightmares, ulcers, suicidal tendencies. Besides, if you jump on my shift, that's just rude, man. It's a funny thing when you go to a wardrobe fitting to choose a season's costumes, but you're only gonna wear one thing. So it's almost overwhelming when you're given that kind of choice. So I remember thinking, I can't put any more thought into this than Robby would put into it on a given Tuesday. So you grab what's clean. Grab that shirt, grab those pants, grab that hoodie, grab those socks, grab those shoes, out the door. So that's exactly as much thought as I put into that costume. So I got such a kick out of seeing people wearing that hoodie for Halloween and for people selling it. It was such a random choice, but it seemed to work. I usually steal a piece of wardrobe for every show I'm in, and that seemed to be the most representative piece of clothing for Robby. I am told that we had between 6 and 8 of those. There was always a clean one in my room. For the most part.
Pupils, 4 millimeters, and reactive.
Okay, that's encouraging.
What do you want for meds? 120 ketamine, 80 of rock.
That's a lot more blood than expected. We pride ourselves on being the most medically accurate show to date on television, and we arrive at that by having an incredible team of technical advisors on our staff, led by Dr. Joe Sachs and Dr. Mel Herbert, who are both legends in the field of emergency medicine. Joe was a technical advisor on ER and also a writer, as he is on this show as well. Dr. Mel Herbert created MRAP, the largest compendium of online knowledge for medical students ever. They both bring over 100 years of combined expertise to our show, in addition to real-life trauma nurses and ER physicians who are on the set all the time, explaining pronunciation, explaining procedures, but maybe even more significantly, explaining the specificity of emotional reaction to a case depending on what level of year you are in your education. So if we're in a trauma room and there's a patient on the table and I'm in the room and Samira's in the room and Whitaker's in the room, those are three very different perspectives on the same case. One is a student, one is an R3, and one is an attending. And each one of those brings a different level of anxiety and a different level of problem-solving skills. So we rely really heavily on our technical advisors, not just for the physicality, but also the emotionality as well. Whitaker's first patient dying.
5 minutes since the last epi.
Okay, that's it. Hold compressions. Everybody loses a patient for the first time, and it's a significant event in medical education. And it happens to Whitaker on his first day. And it was a patient that he had started to build a personal rapport with, which often hits harder. And it's significant for Whitaker. It's significant for Robby being the attending. You know, when these things happen to your staff, you need to be able to help them contextualize, compartmentalize, analyze, and hopefully move on from in the healthiest way possible. And in imparting that advice to Whitaker in the beginning, saying these things are random, it's a numbers game. A lot of people die every day. This one happened to show up on your watch, this one happened to show up on your table, it's no fault. You know, maybe 2 or 3 people in the world could have caught this case. I'm not one of them either. You know, it's all geared towards saying we play the percentages here, we do the best we can, and we get bogged down in our mistakes at the detriment of treating our next patient. We don't walk into the room still treating the patient we just came from. We have to walk in objective and clear. That's easier said than done. And over the course of the season, what you begin to see is that Robby preaches what he can't practice. His advice to move on and not let things debilitate you is exactly his issue. He was your patient, Dr. Whitaker. Would you like to say something before we all take a brief moment of silent reflection?
He liked Kentucky bourbon.
Okay, good, me too. We shoot with 2 cameras. We have 2 operators in the first season who shot the entire season simultaneously. We have an operator named Amy who wears a handheld camera on her shoulder. And then we have an operator named Erdem who uses a device called a ZG, which is sort of analogous to a Steadicam. It's not exactly a steady image and it's not exactly easy rig bounce. It gives a kind of a texture that's really specific. We tend to shoot only with about 2 lenses. We shoot with a 50 millimeter lens and a 75 millimeter lens. Those are the 2 lenses that are most comparable to a human eye's perspective. We never put a camera on a gurney wheel going down a hallway. We never put a camera on a ceiling shooting an overhead shot. All of the photography is subjective to a character's point of view and to somebody who's in the room voyeuristically, which gives this sense of presence for the viewer that you aren't a passive viewer in this experience. You're sort of a participant, and you're being asked to be on the same endurance test that these characters are. Can you stay on your feet? Can you sit through all these cases and make it to the end of the shift? In your attempt to try to create a show that breaks through the noise and differentiates itself from every other show that's come before it, you think about ways you could shake up the form. And Scott Gemmell had 2 really interesting ideas to try for this one. One is to play the show in real time and limit the entire structure to 15 consecutive hours. And the other is to strip away all the artifice as possible, especially the music and the sound design, and let the environment and the beeps on the machines and the sound of a ventilator and the sound of a baby crying and a man screaming be the soundtrack for the show. Those were all really speculative ventures that we were really gratified to see worked exactly the way we had hoped, which is the lack of music and the lack of manipulation in telling a viewer how to feel actually increases the degree of engagement, because when you're on your phone and you're, oh, the violins, oh, sad scene, I get it. Then suddenly you don't hear the violins, you don't know quite how you're supposed to feel about what you're watching. It forces you to kind of look for clues within the frame and abandon that other screen that you had in your hand. As you get more immersed in the storytelling, hopefully you realize very quickly that you don't have the objectivity of looking down on this pit. You're inside this pit with everybody else. The 4 things that matter most. Basically just a few key things that we can say when we're saying goodbye to a loved one that can really help.
What are they?
They're gonna sound really simple, but I swear I've seen them work.
Okay.
I love you. Thank you. I forgive you. please forgive me. Yeah, the four most important things, the Ho'oponopono ritual that we borrowed. In pre-production, and I met a man named Dr. Ira Byrock, who wrote a book called The Four Things That Matter Most. And his specialty is sort of end-of-life care, palliative care. And he had adopted this Hawaiian ritual called Ho'oponopono to his practice, where basically he found that if you could say, thank you, I love you, I forgive you, please forgive me, it had an unbelievably catalytic effect in beginning the grief process on a healthy road. And even with somebody that you don't have the opportunity to have closure with, just saying those out loud seems to give a sense of peace and closure to somebody witnessing an end-of-life event. And so I was really taken with it, and we thought, well, let's put that on the show somehow. And then I was lucky enough to get assigned episode 4, where that was on the board, and it fit beautifully, you know, as a piece of architecture to work through for the whole episode. And it was a really lovely piece of messaging to put out there. And I've received a lot of mail back from people since that episode aired, saying that that has been a real aid in their own grief process.
What were those 4 things again?
I love you, thank you, I forgive you, please forgive me.
I love you, Dad. I've loved every minute we've gotten to spend together.
Interestingly enough, this was the first time I think this has maybe ever happened where we hired a production designer before we'd even written a word on the page, because we needed to have a set to write to. Because this all takes place in real time, we needed to know how long it took to get from Trauma 1 to Central 14, and how long it took from Central 14 to North 4, so that we could write dialogue that would take up exactly that period of time, and we could begin to plot these characters in a 3-dimensional space and have their journey not repeat itself over the 15-hour shift. So we hired Nina Ruscio, who's just a brilliant art director and production designer, and she did a lot of research on emergency room design and optimum flow and sight lines. And we told her kind of what we needed. We needed an arena space so that you could shoot 360 degrees in, but we also needed some private spaces for conversations to feel like they were slightly tucked away. We wanted some exam rooms to have doors, and we needed some curtained areas where you would feel very public. We needed a doctor's lounge, we needed a bathroom, we needed this, we needed that. And then we said, we need this other room. We need this room, the room where it all happens. It's the peds room, it's in the northeast corner of the hospital. We need it to feel incongruously pleasant. The imagery in there should feel almost sickly positive, you know, cartoony in a way that feels reassuring when you're first in there, but then almost becomes a macabre sense of dissonance when you see what actually happens in that room.
This is happening, like now. We just decided that Dad is gonna die in this room, in a room with cartoon forest animals all over it.
God, if you think about it, it's kind of perfect.
So we talked a lot about, you know, animals, and maybe it's a zoo motif or a circus motif. I don't know why we landed on that fox as being the emblematic sort of iconic image in that room, but that's what we landed on. And so it became a touchstone room for me. When we were constructing the set, I would go in there when it was just plywood and think to myself, this is the room where it all happened. This is the room where it's all going to happen. This is the room where the backstory took place, and this is the room where we're going to tell our story in. And then as that came together, I'd go in there and just spend even more time in there, to the point where that room and I had an intimate relationship before we got to shooting those scenes. And then once we came to shoot them, that place was, and still is, a very live environment for me. The drowning victim.
Thank you for saving me. When you come home, I promise I won't touch your toys without asking. And I try not to fight because you're my best friend in the whole entire world. I love you.
That was a script written by Dr. Joe Sachs. That anecdote came to us from a woman who's I think she's a charge nurse that Joe works with at Northridge. And she came in and we were interviewing her just anecdotally, and she told us a story about a child that had died, And in an effort to break the news to the sibling, she'd gone to the gift store and bought a stuffed animal and come back and said, whisper whatever you want to tell your sister into this stuffy's ear, and I'll take it in there and she'll tell him. And as soon as she told us that story, we all were like, oh my God, that may be the saddest thing we've ever heard. Then all of us were like, I want that story. I hope I get that one. And Joe got it. And Joe got nominated for that episode. He got nominated for an Emmy for that episode. And it's a beautifully written episode, but it's so unrelentingly sad. You have this 8-year-old girl who drowns in the attempt of trying to save her sister, which she does, while the grandmother's vacuuming in the house and can't hear any of it. Then you have the parents showing up, and obviously you don't want to be the grandmother in that situation. You don't want to be the little girl on the table, and you certainly don't want to be the little sister. You're looking at this and you go, I don't want to be anybody in this story. I don't want to be anybody in this room. This is horrible. Obviously they're going to save this child. And then we don't. And you're like, how can you betray my faith in television happy endings this way? Are you telling me that this isn't going to have a happy ending, and the only happy ending I'm going to see is this holistic honor walk that honors the organ donation that this 18-year-old kid is going to go through on the other side of a fentanyl overdose while his own family's falling apart? Like, it was such a 1-2 punch. One storyline you'd been invested in since the first episode, one you're just getting hit with, immediately. The fentanyl patient.
Like you're gonna make it? Didn't you respond to Narcan?
I think his pinpoint pupils just grew into blown pupils from brainstem death.
Shit.
There was something really beautiful about Robby knowing in episode 1 that this kid was dead, but not wanting the parents to have to face that reality before they were ready. So it's the way that he says we could still do these tests to confirm, and then we'll know more. And I'll come back in a little while and we can talk about where we'll be at that point. It's this slow and steady acclimation to really hard news that is, I think, what differentiates Robby from a lot of other physicians, that sensitivity. And that understanding that, you don't compound tragedy with tragedy. You gotta, give people a little bit of a sense of hope in order to be able to come to a place of closure. That's what I think he was trying to do, and that brain image is the very last step on that tour towards acceptance. It is so conclusive when you see what a healthy brain looks like when it's being perfused with blood and oxygen, and then what's going on with their son is just the opposite. It shows it in very stark relief, the reality. At that point, they are willing to accept their son's death, but they aren't anywhere near ready to accept the concept of organ donation, so that becomes the next set of chapters. I remember seeing an interview once with Sir Ben Kingsley, who talked about the funniest set he was ever on was Schindler's List. I was like, what? And he said that because everything they did all day long was so heavy and so depressing, they would go out at night and they would dance and they would sing and they would play music, and they engendered these wonderful relationships with each other just out of necessity, just to reaffirm something positive, life affirming. The same is true in a hospital situation. You get some really funny people saying some really funny things in really harrowing circumstances, therapeutically, medicinally.
You owe me a dance.
Well, I am a little rusty, but let's give it a go, shall we? Mm-hmm. Ready? Mm-hmm. That's something we've tried to weave into our show, not just because it's real, but because audiences need to have a little bit of relief from that tragedy. They need to kind of go positive, negative in order to appreciate and enjoy the ride. The Pittfest tragedy.
God. Yep. Code triage. Multiple GSWs. There's an active shooter at Pittfest.
At the end of episode 11, I believe, we get a call over the radio that there's an active shooter at Pittfest, and that as the nearest trauma center, we're going to be getting the bulk of the cases that are coming, and they are going to be horrific. And knowing that my stepson and his girlfriend are there puts a personal spin on it for Robby, but it's such a community event that everybody feels somehow connected to this, and it's going to be the last thing that this, hospital needs right now. And so in the structure of the season, it was like, okay, let's create a pressure cooker where we add ingredients and heat and pressure over a period of time, like 10, 11 hours until this thing's ready to explode. And just at the moment when it's about to explode, we'll drop a piano on top of it. And that's what Pittfest represented to this staff. And it redefined the whole series from that point forward. Everybody that you'd seen experiencing their first day on the job was about to get tested mightily. Your protagonist that you expect to be the white knight that's going to come charging in on his horse and save the day. Suddenly that horse comes in without its rider because the rider's on the floor of the peds room having a breakdown, having lost his number one mentor student in Dr. Langdon, who was just kicked out an hour earlier for a revealed drug addiction, having lost his charge nurse, who just got punched in the face by an aggressive patient 2 hours ago. He lost his other best fourth-year resident in Dr. Collins, who's gone home, and suddenly he finds himself without any of the architecture or apparatus that would sustain him in this moment, completely alone, right when he needs everybody the most. And then the shit really hits the fan.
Larry, headwoods don't go to yellow. Wait, what? Triage says yellow. Hold on, go. I've got this.
We modeled it after the Las Vegas shooting. The hospital that received the bulk of those trauma cases did an unbelievable job. Everybody that went into that hospital with a life-saving injury went upstairs to surgery alive. And they saved so many people because of the protocols that they put into place in the event of a mass casualty event. What were those protocols? They didn't exist in that hospital until one of the doctors who happened to be on shift that night months earlier had decided that they were ill-equipped to handle a mass casualty event. And so he himself went to Israel and went to a hospital and studied how they do it there when they are on the receiving end of a terrorist attack. And he copied all the notebooks and brought them all back and stuck them on the shelf in the hospital. And they just happened to be there when this happened. And they pulled the binders off the shelves and said, this is what we're doing. And because they did that, when they did that, they saved a lot of lives. So we wanted to replicate that and add to it in a way. And so again, Dr. Joe Sachs came up with this really interesting protocol of using slap bands that are color coordinated to determine degree of severity of case. Up until that point, usually they do kind of tags, colored tags. But this idea of slap bands was something that Joe came up with and is now being marketed and implemented in hospitals. So we've actually contributed to these protocols with our show. But yeah, it's the moment when all of the medicine that we've been practicing to that moment and all the tools and diagnostic equipment that we have at our disposal is all going out the window right now. We are gonna do frontline war zone medicine where it's live or die, dying in the first hour, dying in the next hour, dying in the next 5 minutes. This is what we're treating first. It's a trial by fire for all the characters. It just worked really, really well. But we also kind of invented this really cool, Nina Ruscio, again, came up with this wonderful idea of modular blood that was like it's plastic, it's a synthetic, but we could lay it out almost like a carpet and it could come in all these different forms. It could be a spill, or it could be a spill with gurney wheel tracks going through it, or it could be a splatter, or it could be a spill that's in the process of being mopped up by a janitorial service. But at the end of the day, you could pick these things up and you could move them around. And best of all, if you walked through them, you didn't track blood prints everywhere unless we wanted to. So the times when we're walking through it and leaving tracks is super specific. The other times, all that stuff is plastic and laid down on the ground, and you could pick it up and move it wherever you want. And that was a really exciting kind of novel approach to doing it. I'd never seen that done before.
I don't know how many people I've helped today, but I can tell you every other person who has died. There was a man named Mr. Spencer who died in front of his children, and an 18-year-old who was brain dead from a fentanyl overdose, and then a little girl who drowned trying to save her sister. And I'm gonna remember Leah long after you've forgotten her.
I'm wired kind of funny, you know. It sounds funny to describe it this way, but to me, those are really wonderful days, because that feeling that comes out in that breakdown, I had been carrying since pre-production and kindling like a little fire in my stomach so that I could be at a brunch with friends and go, is it there? Yeah, it's still there. I could do it right now. And I'd be in bed with my wife and I go, is it there? Yeah, it's there. I could do it right now. And I'd be making breakfast for my kids and I'd say, is it there? Yeah, it's right there right now. And I would just keep checking in with it over weeks, over months. And then finally we got to close that day and I was like, you know what today is? Today's the day you don't have to carry this anymore. You get to let it go today. And it becomes sort of a liberation moment where you get to put it down. And oh my God, I loved it, loved it. I'm a little emotional now because we're shooting episode 13 currently. We finish it tomorrow. We start episode 14 on Tuesday. We're in the championship rounds of season 2 when all of the same attendant emotional baggage is coming up for the character. It's easier for me to stay in it than to try to come out of it. So again, I'm kindling it as we speak. But it is also full of miracles, and that is a testament to all of you coming together and doing what we do best. Thank you for everything you did here today. We were looking for a very specific type of performer for this. It sounds funny to say, but a lot of the intentionality behind this show was born. The idea was born in pandemic. How to make this show, or the way I wanted to make this show, was born during the strike. 198 days, 2 labor unions in solidarity, shutting the industry down. All of us with picket signs, walking around in circles, thinking about what work should mean, could mean, used to mean. What would we want it to be like if we got the privilege of doing it again? And I kept thinking about ER. I kept thinking about how the first 15 years of my career were spent in this lovely, hermetically sealed environment where we worked hard and played hard and made a great show that felt inclusive and relevant and resonant all over the world. Why can't we do that again? You know, how did we do it the first time? Did we really do it the first time? All that stuff was going through my head. And then this show presented itself. And I found myself again with John Wells and Scott Gemmell. And we started to say, hey, we could try to do this again. And early on, I sent a letter to our casting director, Kathy Sandrich, and I said, this is kind of what we're doing. I said, it's kind of like an Altman movie. It's kind of like Nashville. It's kind of like MASH. It's kind of like McCabe and Mrs. Miller. It's an immersive experience. The camera's going to be shooting 360 degrees. You may be in the deep background for 4 hours and then find yourself in the main part of the narrative for the next 3. You may only be in the deep background, but when the camera finds you, you have to be at the apex of your storyline. It's going to require total focus, total dedication, total buy-in for an extended period of time. This is an ensemble piece, and if it's going to succeed, it needs to be almost egoless in its approach. So I basically said, bring your creativity, bring your imagination, leave your ego. This is a different animal, and it's going to move fast, but it's going to be really rewarding. And it was like, if you build it, they will come. Like, people just kept showing up saying, this is what I've been craving. This is what I've wanted to do. This is the meaning I've been missing in my work, or the sense of community or family or solidarity. And I feel like we threw a really great party for ourselves. And then the world was like, that looks like fun. I want to come to that party. And so we're throwing it again. And hopefully they'll feel the same way about season 2.